Welcome to my talk on interactively establishing fact-independent consistency in answer set programs, which is a joint work by Gabriele Kern-Isberner and me, Thevapalan. So using answer set programs in practice comes with many challenges. One major challenge is that oftentimes we want to be able to use one program with different and interchangeable input data or instance data. So for example, if we have a program to diagnose the illness of a patient, we want to be able to use it for different patient and patient data. This flexibility can lead to unintended results. Especially problematic is the inconsistency caused by the derivability of complementary statements. So the here presented approach should be seen as a key part to for an interactive framework which serves the purpose to facilitate program updates. And what we want to establish is we want the knowledge expert, we want to enable the knowledge expert to interactively resolve those types of conflicts interactively, and so that no technical knowledge about ASP is required, but we want to ensure that at the end, the modified knowledge base is still professionally adequate. And this is in principle not the case when we use automated ASP update approaches. So first, some basic definitions. We will talk about extended logic programs, which are non-disjunctive in our case, and they consist of a set of rules. And these rules have head and body literals, and these literals are built from atoms A, and we allow the classical negation, and we also allow the default negation, which we will denote here with the snake symbol. And we will say that a rule R is applicable if we have a set of consistent literals or an interpretation S, so that the body is true in S. And then we will say, or we will talk about extended literals at star whenever we mean a classical or default literal. And the snake symbol for not we will also use for to say to denote the default complement for a literal. And as I mentioned before in the beginning, we will distinguish in a program P between the input data and the program core. So the program core are the main rules with known antibodies, and our input data are the interchangeable set of facts, which are here over extensional atoms. What are extensional atoms in our case? Those are atoms which do not occur in rule heads of the program core. So our goal is that we want to resolve all the potential conflicts so that we can allow all possible input data for a given program core or for a modified program core. And such a modified program core where all these potential conflicts are resolved, we will coin uniformly non-contradictory program cores. So what is the conflict in our case? So we say that two rules are conflicting whenever their heads are complementary or strongly complementary, and we have an interpretation S so that the bodies are true in this interpretation S. And what we want to do is, so let's say we have a rule Ri and several rule Rj with which Ri is in conflict with. And these rules Rj we will call adversaries, and we want to resolve all these conflicts Ri, Rj simultaneously. And this we will do by adding specific extended literals to our rule Ri, so that at the end all these conflicts are resolved. And such an extension we will call a lambda extension. And our goal is to compute or to find all those conflict resolving extensions. So how to compute those lambda extensions? Let's look at the properties of conflicting rules. So two rules are conflicting whenever the heads are complementary, which I said before, but the two important properties are whenever they are conflicting, we can't find literals in the bodies that are either default complementary or strongly complementary. So what we want to do is, or how can we find a lambda extension? So we define a set beta that contains at least one extended literal of each adversary. And then we take such a set beta and negate every literal in the set beta. And then we should get such a lambda extension. So let's look at our running example. So here we have 3 rules, and rule 1 is in conflict with rule 2 and rule 3. And we can simply take, for example, here simp D, the literal simp D from rule 2, and poslab B from rule 3. We negate them. In this case, we default negate them, add them to rule 1, and we can see that with this extension, the conflicts are resolved because of not simp D, rule 1 and the extended rule 1 and rule 2 are not conflicting anymore, and the same goes with not poslab B and poslab B in rule 3. So it seems like this is a very straightforward approach, but because of the 2 negation types we use and because of specific interactions, there are some restrictions we have to consider. So first of all, because of the 2 negation types we use, in 2 cases, we have 2 possibilities to negate an extended literal. And we can show that we cannot choose literals in the negation types arbitrarily. So there are some restrictions. So one restriction is when we look at this example here, again, rule 1 is in conflict with rule 2 and rule 3. If we take not B bar and D as our set beta, negate them, so, then one possible solution would be B bar and not D. But we can see that the extended rule itself is not applicable anymore because of B and B bar. So it does matter which literals in our initial rule is already present. The other case is if we take C and not C as our set beta, one possible negated outcome would be C and C bar. And then the extension itself leads to the non-applicability of the whole rule. Yeah, so these are things we have to consider. And that leads us to our definition of a blanket. Such a blanket is a set beta as we observed before, which consists of extended literals and has at least one extended literal for each adversary. And we will say that that a blanket cannot share atoms with body literals of the initial rule Ri. It must not contain complementary literals, and it must not contain reconcilable literals, which are literals of the form not L bar. But we will allow dual literals, which in our case are literals L not L bar. The other thing we can consider is since sometimes we get multiple negation forms, we want to prevent redundant literals. So in our example, if we have a blanket beta not B not B bar, the negation of B would be either B bar or not B, and negation of not B bar would be B bar. Since B bar covers both of the literals, it suffices to take B bar only, so that we don't get redundant literals in our lambda extension. And this shows why dual literals can be used in blankets. On the other hand, here we have reconcilable literals, not B bar, and it's easy to see that as we have shown before, that they cannot be used in a lambda extension. Why? Because if we negate them, we get B and B bar. So they have no common literal, and we cannot use B and B bar in one lambda extension, because then we get, like we had here, a non-applicable rule at the end. So in our example, in our running example, we get 3 different blankets. And now the question is, how do we get all the possible negations or all the possible negated blankets? So for that, we define the negation operator, and all it does is it takes a blanket and outputs all the possible negated blanket variations. I think it's easier to see it in an example. So in our case, we had 3 blankets, and each of the blankets has at least 2 negated versions. And blanket 2 has 4 versions. Why? Because it's easy to see. We have 2 positive literals in our blanket, so they have each 2 different negation options. What do we want next? So next we want to remove redundant literals, because sometimes we get supersets of negated blankets. So we shift the negation operator once more, and we have the operator n, which takes sets of blankets and outputs all the negated variations of all blankets. And then we can remove all the redundant literals and clean up everything. And what we get at the end is, as we can see in our example, is the set of all possible lambda extensions for our rule R1. And we can see in our first solution for our drug example, we also get as one possible lambda extension, not SIMD and not post-lab B. And so this solution is also a valid solution to resolve all conflicts simultaneously. So that wraps up our approach. So what we have shown is how to resolve multiple conflicts of a single rule simultaneously. And we do that by looking and analyzing the rules without the facts and the interchangeable inputs. And we are able to compute every conflict resolving extension for every rule. And this method ensures that we get a uniformly non-contradictory program call. And this is a key part for a bigger interactive framework where we want to analyze the program, when we update the program, we want to show the user of the knowledge and the knowledge expert where are conflicts. We want to explain to the user why this is a conflict, and we want to suggest or to generate all the possible solution options, and we want to explain to the user why a specific solution is a valid, or why a specific suggestion is a valid solution, so that the knowledge expert can make an informed decision how to modify some rules of the program and still end up with a professionally adequate knowledge base at the end. And what we already did is we also looked at incoherence or coherence. So incoherence is inconsistency caused by default negation. And the other thing we want to look at is whenever we have a conflict like here with contradictory statements, sometimes it can be more fitting not to modify the conflicting rules themselves. Sometimes you want to modify the rules that lead to the derivability of the conflict. So the rules that are in the derivability chain before the actual conflicting rules. And the other thing is, in our running example, we already had 8 suggestions for 2 simple conflicts. So we have to find a way to handle a vast amount of suggestions. And one way we want to look at is how can we rank different solution options so that we can prefer one over another maybe with some input from the knowledge expert too. So yeah, thank you for listening.